Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about a girl named Lily, a Cherokee girl who spent her entire childhood and her 20s being watched, followed. From a cemetery in Tulsa, to abandoned apartments in Phoenix, to a lakeside in Oklahoma where something ancient and hungry waited at the water's edge. She moved cities. She changed her locks. She told herself, each time, that it was over. And still, whatever she had invited in on that warm September afternoon when she was 11 years old, it always found its way back to her door. So before we go any further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel ASMR Horror, but only if this is the kind of story that keeps you up at night. And leave me a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? I love knowing you're out there, somewhere in the dark, listening along. Now, let's begin the story of a girl who, for 20 years, never learned how to stop being followed, and something that, even now, is still waiting on the other side of a single thin string. September 2015, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The funeral home sat at the edge of a neighborhood where people had money enough to make death look beautiful. The cemetery beside it was one of those places that made you forget what it actually was. Rolling hills of green grass, a small pond with koi fish drifting lazily beneath the surface, rows of cherry blossom trees that would bloom pink and pale every spring. Stone paths wound between the headstones, kept clean and edged and perfect. It was the kind of cemetery children wanted to run through. And Lily Runningwater was exactly that kind of child. She was 11 years old the September her uncle passed. Cancer had taken him slowly, the way cancer tends to do. First the weight, then the color, then the light behind his eyes. By the time it was over, his passing felt almost like a mercy. The funeral was held across 3 days, as was tradition in their family, and Lily attended every single one. Her parents never considered keeping her home. In Cherokee tradition, you don't run from death. You sit with it. You honor it. You look it in the eye and you say the right words so that the one who's left behind doesn't lose their way. On the second afternoon, Lily wandered the cemetery with a pair of her cousins. The weather had turned cool and soft, the way Oklahoma Septembers sometimes do. Not yet fall, but no longer summer. A kind of in-between that made everything feel slightly unreal. The three of them walked the stone paths, reading names on headstones, stopping sometimes at the pond to watch the koi turn slow circles beneath the surface. It was Lily who spoke first. "Don't you think it's sad," she said, "that people come here to visit and don't bring anything?" Her cousin Marcus glanced at her sideways. "Not everyone brings food, but in our tradition, you bring food for the dead. That's what my grandma always says." Lily looked out across the rows of headstones, many of them bare. No flowers, no offerings, no trace that anyone had come by in weeks. "I feel bad for them. Don't you think they're hungry?" Marcus shrugged and said he didn't know. By the time they turned back toward the funeral home, Lily had already made up her mind. She slipped away from the family gathering, walked to the table where guests had left out trays of food, fruit, small wrapped candies, little bags of chips, and filled her hands. Then she walked back out into the cemetery alone, moving from stone to stone, crouching down, placing a piece of fruit here, a wrapped candy there, a small handful of things at the base of each headstone she passed. She worked with the quiet focus of someone completing a task that mattered, her small hands pressing each offering gently into the grass as though placement was important. Her older cousins found her there eventually. "Lily, what are you doing?" her cousin Dara called out, already laughing. "Feeding them," Lily answered simply, without looking up. More laughter. They watched from a distance, nudging each other, shaking their heads. She didn't care. She kept going. In her mind, she was doing something good, something kind, the kind of thing her grandmother would have understood even if no one else did. When she finally finished, she stood and brushed her hands against her jeans and felt quietly satisfied. It was only when she was nearly back at the funeral home that someone stopped her. Her oldest cousin, Jordan, 17, lean and serious in the way that older teenagers sometimes are, looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "You know what we're always taught," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know," Lily said. "When you offer food to the dead, you're not just leaving a gift. You're opening a door." He paused. "You're inviting them to come closer. And if they come close enough," he tilted his head slightly, "they remember the way." Lily held his gaze. "I was being kind." Jordan nodded slowly. "I know you were." He looked back toward the rows of headstones. "Just be careful. If you keep feeding them and being kind to them, they might want to follow you home." He walked away. Lily stood at the edge of the cemetery for a moment, the late afternoon light falling long and golden across the grass, the koi pond glinting in the distance. She watched the shadows lengthen between the stones. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that Jordan was just being dramatic, that she had done a good thing and good things had good consequences. The next morning she came back. Every piece of food she had placed was gone. Not disturbed. Gone. Clean, as though nothing had ever been set there. Even the candy wrappers had disappeared, and she had placed 3 or 4 of those. Only the bare stone remained, unmarked, unremarkable, exactly as it had been before she had ever stopped there. Something moved at the edge of her chest. Not quite fear, not quite pride. Something between them, something without a name. She looked back toward the funeral home where the family was gathering for the final day of service. The sky was clear. The air smelled like cut grass and something faintly sweet she couldn't place. She went inside and didn't say a word about it to anyone. That night they buried her uncle. They said the words that needed to be said. They drove home through the Oklahoma dusk with the windows cracked, the warm air moving through the car, everyone quiet in the particular way people are quiet after a burial. Lily watched the streetlights come on one by one and thought about the empty stones. And for reasons she wouldn't be able to articulate until she was much older, she had the distinct and sudden feeling, fleeting, easy to dismiss, impossible to shake entirely, that something in that cemetery had watched her leave, and was glad it now knew the direction she was going. The burial happened on the 3rd day, late in the afternoon. By the time the family said their goodbyes and drove back home through the Oklahoma dusk, the sky had gone the color of a bruise, deep purple at the edges, fading to black overhead. Lily sat in the back seat between her younger cousins, watching the streetlights come on one by one through the window, thinking about nothing in particular. She was tired in the heavy, hollow way that comes after days of grief, when your body has been holding tension for so long that finally releasing it leaves you feeling emptied out rather than rested. She ate dinner without tasting it, showered without thinking, climbed into bed well before 9 o'clock. Her parents were still in the living room, their voices low and tired. The house was still. The night was ordinary. She closed her eyes. The dog started barking at 11. Her neighbor 3 houses down had a golden retriever named Biscuit. Lily knew this because she had petted Biscuit through the fence enough times to have learned its name. Biscuit was not a barking dog. He was the kind of dog that slept on the porch and lifted one eyebrow when you walked past and went back to sleep. In the 3 years they had lived in this house, Lily could not remember Biscuit ever barking at night. He was barking now. Frantic, sustained, the kind of barking that didn't let up. Lily lay still and told herself to ignore it. Then she heard the laughter. It came from outside her window, the window that looked out over the backyard, the narrow strip of lawn between the house and the fence. At first she thought it was someone on the street, a person walking past and laughing on the phone, something mundane and easily dismissed. But it didn't fade the way sound fades when someone walks away. It stayed, and it grew, and it was wrong. She couldn't have explained it precisely in that moment. It was the kind of wrongness that registers in the body before the mind catches up. A tightening along the back of the neck, a slow crawl of cold moving up through the stomach. The laughter rose and fell in a rhythm that didn't match anything natural. It sounded distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. She couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. She couldn't tell if there was one voice or several, each one layered just slightly off from the others. All she knew was that it had been distant a minute ago, and now it was not. Then she heard something else, a tinkling, faint at first, barely audible beneath the laughter, but unmistakable. The soft, delicate sound of beads and coins moving together, like someone wearing a garment heavy with small decorations, walking slowly. It was a sound she knew from ceremony, from gatherings, from the way her grandmother's hands sounded when she moved through a room wearing her wampum. But this was not her grandmother. The cadence was wrong. The rhythm had no pattern to it, no intentionality, just the random shifting sound of something moving without purpose through the dark outside her window. And it was getting closer. Lily kept her eyes closed. She told herself, "Don't look. Don't open your eyes. Don't turn your head. Don't look at the window. Just breathe. Just wait for it to pass." The sound stopped. The laughter stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, and it was wrong in exactly the same way the laughter had been wrong. Too complete, too sudden, like a room going dark in the middle of a sentence, like the moment before something decides to move. And then she couldn't move. It came all at once, a pressure descending onto her chest, her arms, her legs, her entire body, as though something had settled its full weight upon her and the mattress had slowly swallowed her up to the chin. She tried to lift her right arm and it would not lift. She tried to turn her head and it would not turn. She willed her eyes open and they would not open. Her mouth sealed shut against every sound she tried to form. Her heart was the only thing that kept moving, slamming itself against her ribs in full-throated panic, the one part of her that had not been claimed. She knew she was not alone in the room. It was not an inference. It was knowledge, the way temperature is knowledge. Immediate, physical, impossible to argue with. The room was occupied in a way it had not been occupied before. Something had weight without form. Something displaced the air around it. Something made the temperature beside her ear noticeably, distinctly colder than the rest of the room. A cold that had direction to it, that leaned, and then it spoke. She would try, later, when she was older, to find the words for what she had heard. She would always fail. It was a whisper, distorted, half word, half sound, like language heard at the bottom of a deep well. It said something she almost understood, something that existed right at the edge of meaning, close enough to feel like a sentence but never quite resolving into one. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and when it finished, she heard the thing she would never forget for the rest of her life. The sound of something smiling, the breath of something amused, something that had come a long way and found exactly what it was looking for. She did not think, she did not decide, she did not choose. She screamed, not a gasp, not a whimper, a sound that tore up out of her from somewhere below language, full-lunged and desperate and completely involuntary. She felt the pressure release. She felt her body return to her, limb by limb, in the space of a single second. She heard the door crack open down the hall, and then her parents' feet on the floor, and then her mother saying her name. When her mother's arms closed around her, Lily cried so hard she forgot how to breathe. Her father stood in the doorway and looked at her mother once, just once, across the room. A long, steady look that said everything without saying anything. He went outside. He found the bundle of dried cedar and sage in the cabinet by the door. The one that had always been there. The one Lily had never thought to ask about. And he walked a slow circle around the entire house in the dark, his voice carrying low and deliberate through the walls. Old words. Words from the language his grandfather had taught him. The ones passed down for exactly this kind of night. When Lily finally calmed, she told her parents everything. Her father listened without interrupting. Then he sat quiet for a moment on the edge of her bed, his hands resting open on his knees. "You gave food to the dead," he said. "I didn't know," Lily said. "I thought I was being kind." He nodded. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Now you know." He meant it as a closing, a lesson, a door shut, a thing put behind them. But the cedar smoke that lingered through the house for the next several days had a different feeling to it, less like celebration and more like a boundary, less like welcome and more like warning. And Lily, lying in bed that night with every light in her room switched on, understood without quite forming the thought that whatever had visited her that night had not come because it was angry. It had come because it had been invited, and now it knew the way. The summer Lily turned 12, her family moved. The house on the east side of Tulsa was supposed to be a fresh start. Smaller than their previous one, yes, and in a neighborhood that was rougher around the edges, but the rent was manageable and the rooms were large. It was a duplex. 2 units sharing a wall, the other side rented to a rotating series of families who came and went and never stayed long. The neighbors on the block didn't think much of that. People moved. That was the nature of things. The room the 4 youngest children shared was at the back of the house. A wide room with tall ceilings and, tucked into one corner, a narrow door that opened onto steep attic stairs. The attic was small and dark and unlit. They used it for nothing. The door was just a feature of the room, unremarkable, easy to ignore. For the first few months, everything was fine. Then came the night in late October when Lily woke up thirsty around 2 in the morning and went downstairs to the kitchen. She didn't turn on the overhead light. She knew the kitchen well enough to navigate it in the dark. Where the glasses were, which floorboard creaked, where to put her feet. She filled her glass at the sink and turned around. It was standing in the middle of the kitchen, a figure. Child-sized, perhaps 4 feet tall, standing in the rectangle of pale moonlight falling through the window. It had the silhouette of a child, the proportions, the slight hunch of small shoulders, the head at the right height. But it had no features, no face, no hands, no texture at all. It was dark in a way that was different from the darkness around it, dense and absolute, like a shape cut out of the world rather than a thing standing in it. Lily stood absolutely still with her glass of water in her hand. Her heart sank, floor by floor, through her chest. The thing in the kitchen did not move. Then she ran. She told no one. She convinced herself she had imagined it. She was tired. She was still unsettled from September. Her mind was playing tricks. These were reasonable explanations, and she held on to them hard. 3 weeks later, she saw it on the stairs. Coming down one morning, she looked up and found it standing at the top landing. The same dense, featureless shape, the same absolute stillness. She pressed herself to the wall and slid past it with her back against the wallpaper, and went straight out the front door without breakfast, heart pounding until she was half a block away. She still told no one. Then came the night in January. She was already in bed when she heard the attic door open. Not slowly, not violently. A steady, quiet swing, the hinges turning without protest. She opened her eyes. In the dark, she could see the attic door standing fully open, and on the stairs leading up into the attic, something was standing. It was no longer child-sized. It was tall. As tall as a grown adult, broad-shouldered, its head nearly touching the low frame of the attic entrance, and it was looking down at her. Not at the room in general, not at the far wall, not at nothing. At her, specifically, in the particular spot where she lay. Her younger brother woke up and screamed. Her parents came running. They saw the attic door standing open. They saw the faces of their children, and they asked very few questions. The next day, Lily learned that she had not been the only one. Her little brother had seen the small figure in the kitchen twice without telling anyone. Her uncle, visiting for a weekend in November, had seen something on the stairs. 2 families who had rented the other half of the duplex had moved out within months of arriving, always quietly, always without full explanation. Her family called Raymond. Raymond was a medicine man, a term that didn't fully capture what he was, which was a man who had spent 40 years learning how to stand in the space between the visible world and the one that ran alongside it, without being consumed by either. He arrived one afternoon with a leather bag and no particular expression on his face, and he spent 3 hours walking through the house alone, touching door frames, kneeling at corners, pausing in the attic for a long time with the door pulled shut behind him. When he came out, he spoke to Lily's father at the front door. Lily was in the hallway around the corner. She was not supposed to be there. She heard him anyway. "There are more than one," Raymond said. His voice was even, unhurried. "Two that belong to this place, and a third." A pause. "The third is not Cherokee. I don't know what it is. But it isn't lost. It isn't wandering. It's waiting." Lily's father asked him something too quiet for her to hear. Raymond answered, "Not for the house. For her." Lily pressed her back against the hallway wall and stood very still, the way she had learned to stand when she didn't want whatever was in the room to know she was there. After Raymond left, her father burned cedar in every room and didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Her mother made dinner and kept the radio on. No one said anything about what Raymond had said. But that night, Lily lay in bed with her eyes open and thought about the two she understood, the small figure and the tall one, and about what Raymond had said they were. She thought about the attic, about a mother and a son, and she thought about the third, the one that was not lost, the one that was not wandering, the one that was waiting for her. Years passed. Lily grew up and moved out and rebuilt herself into someone who didn't talk about the things she had seen. It was easier than it sounds. The human mind is remarkably good at filing difficult things away, not erasing them, but relocating them, moving them to a shelf in a room you don't often visit. She went to college. She worked. She made friends who did not know her family, who did not know Raymond, who had no frame of reference for what she had grown up with. She learned to speak around it, to tell stories that ended just before the part that couldn't be explained. She was 23 and living in a studio apartment in Phoenix when the curiosity finally won. It came on a night like any other. She was sitting up late with her laptop open and a cup of coffee going cold beside her keyboard, and something made her type the address of the Tulsa duplex into a search bar. She didn't have a plan. She was not looking for anything in particular. She just wanted to see if there was anything there. There was. The records were public. County court filings, cross-referenced with a local news archive that had digitized its back issues into the mid-2000s. She found a short article, 3 paragraphs. The language was careful in the way that language is when the details are bad enough that editors soften them. A man named Dennis Hollis had been arrested at that address approximately 2 years before her family had moved in. The charges were serious. The details of the case were partially sealed because the victims were minors, but the shape of it was clear enough between the lines of the article, in the phrasing around what had occurred in the upstairs portion of the residence, in the way the reporter had written, "And the father fled before police arrived. A woman and her son. The attic. The father." Lily sat very still in her Phoenix apartment and read the article 3 times. She thought about the first figure she had ever seen, small, child-sized, standing in the moonlight in the kitchen, the shape of a child, dense and absolute and utterly still. She thought about the figure on the stairs, the same size, the same darkness. She thought about the night the attic door swung open on its own, and the thing standing on the stairs was no longer small. It was tall, adult-sized, patient. She had always assumed, without quite forming the thought, that she had been watching one thing shift and grow over time. One presence in the house, changing shape as it settled. But Raymond had said, there are more than one. The woman and the son. 2, tethered to the place where the worst thing had happened to them, to the attic stairs, to the dark above the door that no one used for anything. She set down her coffee cup. She opened the article again. She scrolled to the last line she had skimmed past. Hollis fled before officers arrived and has not been located. She sat with that for a long time. He had never been found, never tried, never sentenced. He had been there, and then he had not been there, and the state of Oklahoma had filed papers and generated records and eventually closed the case, and Dennis Hollis had walked out of a room where he had done something unforgivable and disappeared entirely into the world. She thought about Raymond's voice in the hallway, the words she wasn't supposed to hear. The third. Not Cherokee. Not lost. Not wandering. Waiting. For her. Lily had been 11 the first time she saw the small shape in the kitchen. The mother and the son had been in that house for years before her family arrived. 2 years of the attic standing empty, the case going cold, the building sitting between tenants. And the third had been there too, from the beginning, because the third did not belong to the place. The third was not tethered the way grief tethers. The third was there because it had chosen to be. She thought about the last night she had seen the tall figure. Not in the attic doorway, not on the stairs, but later, much later, in the final weeks before her family had finally moved out. She had woken up at 3 a.m. to find the attic door closed and every light in the room off and the tall shape standing not on the stairs but beside her bed. Just standing. Just watching. She had been 10 years old and she had pulled the blanket over her head and prayed until morning. She had never told her parents about that night. She had told herself it was a dream because 11-year-old children are very good at telling themselves the things they need to believe to get through the morning. She closed the laptop now and sat in the dark of her Phoenix studio and thought about the figure by her bed, about the patience in the way it stood, about how it had not touched her, had not spoken, had simply observed with the stillness of something that understood time differently than she did, something that was not in a hurry, something that was waiting for the right moment. She went to the window and looked out at the Phoenix night, the orange glow of the city, the distant headlights on the freeway, the flat dark of the sky. She lived on the 4th floor. The street below was empty. She checked the lock on the window anyway. Then she went to bed with every light in the apartment on and thought about what it meant that a man who had done what Dennis Hollis had done had walked out of a room and never been found, and whether not being found in the world of the living and not being found at all were necessarily the same thing. Lily was 21 the summer she visited her sister in Knoxville. Her sister Maya had married and settled there, in a quiet neighborhood near the river, and they had a nephew, a little boy named Eli, who was 2 years old and obsessed with trucks and sandbox play and anyone who would sit on the grass and talk to him. Lily took him to Sequoia Hills Park one afternoon while Maya finished some things at home. It was a broad, beautiful stretch of riverside green that the city had kept up nicely. Named for the Cherokee scholar who had given his people a written language, who had believed that words were a form of survival, the name felt right to Lily. It felt like a place she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. They were at the sandbox near the south end of the park when the boy appeared. He was perhaps 8 years old, small-framed, wearing a red shirt that was a size too large for him. He walked up to the sandbox with the casual ease of a child who assumes he is welcome everywhere, and sat down across from Eli without asking. He reached in and began building something with the sand. A mound, a wall, the start of a structure that only he could see the shape of. Eli watched him for a moment, then went back to his trucks. The boy looked up at Lily. He smiled. It was a good smile. Genuine, a little shy. The smile of a kid who didn't smile at strangers easily but meant it when he did. Lily smiled back and turned her face to the sun. She told Eli to play nice. The two boys sat beside each other in that comfortable, parallel silence that young children manage without introduction, each absorbed in their own small world, existing pleasantly alongside the other. After a while, when Lily looked up again, the boy was gone. She hadn't heard him leave. He was simply no longer there. She didn't think anything of it. Children left playgrounds all the time. She didn't think about him again for nearly 2 years. She had moved by then, out of the Phoenix studio into a 1-bedroom apartment closer to the city center. Nicer, quieter, with thick walls and a landlord who fixed things promptly. She had been there 4 months and nothing had happened. She was beginning, very carefully, to believe that whatever had followed her for so long had finally lost interest. That the city was too large, or she had moved too far, or time had simply eroded whatever connection had been made in that Tulsa cemetery 11 years ago. She was lying in bed on a Tuesday night, half asleep, when something grabbed her wrist. From under the bed, a hand, a child's hand, small fingers and a small palm, closed around her wrist and pulled downward, toward the floor. She was awake before she had processed what was happening, her free hand slamming against the mattress, her whole body lurching sideways. She wrenched her wrist free and scrambled upright, standing in the middle of the room with the lights off and her heart trying to break through her sternum. The room was silent. She made herself breathe. She made herself look. He was standing by the door, the boy from the park. The same size, the same proportions, the red shirt that was too big. He stood in the deep shadow near the door, and he did not move. He just looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read in the dark. Not threatening, not angry. Something else. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like longing. Lily did not run. She stood there and looked back. Over the nights that followed, he came back. He sat on the edge of the bed. He moved his mouth as though he was trying to speak. The deliberate motion of lips and jaw, a child working hard to form words. But no sound came out. Nothing at all. As though the connection between what he wanted to say and the means of saying it had been severed somewhere and couldn't be restored. He would try for a while and then stop and just sit and look at her with that same expression she still couldn't name. Finally, she drove to her mother's house and told her everything. Her mother called Raymond. Raymond drove 4 hours from Tulsa. He sat in Lily's apartment for a long time without saying anything, moving from room to room slowly, standing in each corner for a moment. When he came back and sat down at the kitchen table, his face was composed and careful, the way it always was when the news wasn't good. "He followed you from the park," Raymond said. "From 2 years ago?" Lily asked. "Time doesn't work the same way for them." He looked at her steadily. "He chose you at the park. He waited until you had somewhere of your own before he came." He told her what had happened. The boy had been killed in Sequoia Hills Park, strangled by an older man near the riverbank. His body had been found there. The man had taken his own life at the scene. Both of them, together, in the park named for the greatest scholar the Cherokee people had ever produced. Lily thought about the smile, the genuine, slightly shy smile, the boy who meant it when he smiled at strangers. "Why me?" she said. Raymond was quiet for a moment. He saw you looking at him, not glancing, looking, seeing. He paused. "You were the only one there that day who actually saw him." Lily sat with that. "Is he at peace now?" she asked. "Can you do something?" "I can help him move on," Raymond said. "But Lily..." He stopped. "What?" He chose his words carefully. "The boy I can help. The boy I can release." He looked at the door, the dim hallway beyond it. "But the old man, the one who killed him." He paused again. "He wasn't here. When I walked through the apartment, he wasn't present." Lily looked at him. "He's not with the boy anymore," Raymond said. "He separated from the boy at some point, which means..." He stopped himself. "Which means he went somewhere else," Lily finished. Raymond nodded, once, slowly. "Where?" she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The story of Mesa Verde Apartments didn't happen to Lily directly. It happened to her cousin Devon's friends. A group of kids she had grown up knowing at the edges, the way you know people who orbit someone you love without ever quite becoming central to each other's lives. She heard it years later, sitting at Devon's mother's kitchen table in Phoenix while the woman refilled their coffee cups and spoke in the quiet, careful tone that people in Lily's community always used when they talked about things that had actually happened. Mesa Verde Apartments sat at the edge of South Phoenix, one of those complexes built with good intentions and then slowly allowed to grow worn. 3-story buildings arranged around a central courtyard, the kind of place that had been designed for community and had actually achieved it, in the way that proximity and shared difficulty sometimes does. The residents were a dense, interconnected mix. Native families, Hispanic families, a scattering of others. The kids all knew each other. The adults watched each other's children. People looked after each other and kept each other's secrets in equal measure. The apartment at the end of Building C had been empty for several months. No one locked the empty apartments at Mesa Verde. Management was understaffed. Security was theoretical. The kids had known for years that empty units could be accessed. A window latch that never quite caught, a door that swung open if you pushed at the right angle. And they used this knowledge the way bored children everywhere use it, for the specific thrill of being somewhere you were not supposed to be. On a Saturday afternoon in July, Devin and 4 of his friends, boys between 9 and 11, pushed their way into the empty apartment at the end of Building C and played tag in the dark. Nothing happened. They ran through the empty rooms, their sneakers squeaking on bare floors, their laughter bouncing off walls stripped of furniture. They stayed until the light through the windows turned orange, then left the way they had come. Devin's mother made dinner. They went to bed. The next morning, one of the boys woke up with a fever of 104. By evening, he was delirious. His name was Marcus, the quiet one, the careful one, the boy who always thought before he spoke. His mother sat by his bed through the night while he pointed at the wall across the room and screamed. Not in pain, in warning. His fingers shaking, eyes fixed and wide, voice cracking across the same words again and again. Right there, they're going to get me, right there. This went on for 3 days. On the 4th day, the family called for a medicine man. He was younger than Raymond, quieter, working in the tradition that had developed in communities like this one. Part Cherokee ceremony, part practical knowledge accumulated across generations of families navigating the space between the old ways and a world that had moved around them. He spent a long time in Marcus's room. He came out and sat with the family at the kitchen table and told them what he had found. There was a spirit in the apartment at the end of Building C, a woman. She had died there. Not violently, but alone, and in the kind of circumstances that left a person tethered rather than free. The previous family had moved out without ceremony, without releasing her or asking her to release them. They had simply packed their things and left, taking nothing with them that she hadn't already claimed. And so she remained. The boys went in and they played, the medicine man said. They brought energy into an empty place. She was drawn to that. He paused. She chose one of them. Devin's aunt asked why Marcus. He didn't answer that directly. He looked at his hands on the table for a moment, and then looked up, and said only that these things were rarely accidents. He built the trap, a small frame woven from willow branches, set with cornmeal and a small piece of smoked meat and a burning coil of cedar. He spoke over it for a long time. Then he drove to a pond on the west side of the city and left it at the water's edge, continuing to speak as he walked away without looking back. Marcus's fever broke that night. Devin's mother paused when she reached that part of the story. She picked up her coffee cup and set it back down without drinking from it. What I never understood, she said, is why she chose him. They were all in that room. They all played together. They all ran through the same empty apartment in the same dark. She looked at Lily steadily across the table. But she only chose one. Lily met her gaze and said nothing. In my experience, Devin's mother said, that's never an accident. The silence in the kitchen went on for a moment. A truck went by on the street outside. The refrigerator hummed. Lily thought about herself standing at the edge of a cemetery in Tulsa when she was 11 years old, placing candy on the stones of strangers. She thought about Raymond's voice in the hallway, low and even, not lost, not wandering, waiting. For her. She thought about the boy in the red shirt, about Marcus with his fever, about all the people who had walked into all the wrong rooms over all the years and come out changed. And she thought about what it meant that some rooms chose you before you ever walked in, that some things had decided long before the door opened, that by the time you were standing inside the empty apartment with your friends laughing around you and the summer light going orange through the window, the decision had already been made, and it was not yours. Lily's uncle Raymond, not Raymond the medicine man, but her father's brother, a different Raymond entirely, a man who measured happiness in still water and the weight of a fishing line, had loved Tenkiller Lake his entire life. The lake sat in the Cherokee hills of eastern Oklahoma, its name borrowed from a family who had operated a ferry crossing there in the 1800s. It was beautiful in the way that man-made things sometimes become when nature takes them back. The flooded valley, the submerged farmlands slowly reclaimed by silt and root, the way the water held the color of the sky in the early morning before the wind came up. This Raymond had been coming here since he was a teenager. He knew the good spots on every shore. He knew when the bass ran and when they sulked at the bottom, and when patience was useless and when it wasn't. He came alone, or he came with his friend Carl, who was retired and had nothing but time, and whose patience with a fishing rod was the thing he was most known for among the people who knew him. On a Saturday morning in late summer, the two of them drove out before sunrise. They separated when they arrived, Carl taking the near shore where the willows came down to the water's edge, Raymond walking the longer route around to the opposite bank where the water deepened quickly and the bass tended to hold in the afternoon heat. The walk took 20 minutes along a path worn into the lakeshore grass by years of fishermen. Raymond set up his chair, dropped his line, poured coffee from his thermos, and let the morning arrange itself around him. He was there for perhaps an hour before he saw it, on the bank directly across the pond, maybe 50 yards of still green water between him and the opposite shore. Something had been left at the water's edge. He noticed it because it caught the early light at an angle. A small woven frame structure, perhaps the size of a shoebox, sitting precisely at the line where the grass met the mud. Something inside it. Something that glinted. Raymond set down his coffee cup. He recognized it immediately, in the way that people recognize things they have seen before, even when they hoped never to see them again. A spirit trap. The kind built when something needed to be caught and contained and carried far from wherever it was causing harm. Someone had made it, had used it, and had come to this lake to leave it, the way you were supposed to, at a body of water, far from where the trouble had been. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked away. He called Carl on his cell phone and asked if the fish were biting. Carl said slowly. Raymond said he thought he might stay a while longer. Carl agreed that was a good idea. Raymond fished. By mid-afternoon, the sun had dropped below the tree line on the western ridge, and the light on the water had turned from gold to copper. Carl had eventually walked around and settled 20 feet up the bank. They talked a little. They were quiet a lot. The fishing was good. Raymond kept his eyes on the water in front of him and tried to think about nothing in particular. He did not look across at the other bank. The light kept dropping. Copper became violet. The first stars showed themselves in the eastern sky. The surface of the lake went smooth and dark and reflective, the way still water does at the edge of evening when the wind stops and the temperature drops just enough. Carl said he was about ready to call it a day. Raymond said 1 more hour. Carl agreed without argument. It was Carl's rod going slack that made Raymond look up. And in looking up, his eyes crossed automatically to the far bank. The trap was still there, but something was crouched beside it, small, low to the ground, a figure the size of a young child, pressed flat against the muddy bank, lying on its stomach with its face bent down toward the frame structure. Its hair was long and hung forward, obscuring everything above the jaw. Its hands, pale, small, clearly visible against the dark mud, were reaching into the woven frame, pulling something out. The movements were slow and deliberate, the absorbed focus of something eating. Raymond watched for 3 full seconds. He stood up very carefully, the way you stand up when you do not want to disturb the air too much, and he said, very quietly and very steadily, "Carl." Carl looked up from his line. He looked across the water. Lily's uncle heard him draw in a sharp breath through his nose. "We're leaving," Raymond said. They packed without hurrying. That part was important, Raymond would say later. You don't run. You leave steadily, deliberately, as though you have a destination you've chosen rather than a thing you're fleeing. They packed their gear with hands that were careful, walked back around the lake to the gravel car park, got into the truck, and drove north toward Tulsa. Neither of them spoke for the first 15 minutes. Finally, Carl said, "What was that?" Raymond shook his head. He didn't tell Carl the rest. What he told, later, he told only to Lily, because she was the one in the family he talked to about such things, the one who had the kind of history that made the telling feel less like burdening someone and more like sharing a map. In the moment before he looked away, he told her, the figure across the water had lifted its head. It had no eyes, just smooth, unbroken skin where the eyes should have been, the rest of the face entirely normal. A child's face, pale and round, tilted up toward him in the gathering dark, regarding him, somehow, without the means to see. Feeling his attention the way a plant feels the direction of light, turning toward it from across 50 yards of still black water. Raymond had looked away. He had not looked back. "We never went back to that lake," he told Lily. "I fished in a lot of places I probably shouldn't have been. But Tenkiller, after that night, no." Lily held her coffee cup and said nothing. She thought about the spirit trap, about whoever had made it and carried it there and left it at the water and walked away believing it was contained. She thought about what it meant that something was still eating from inside it, and she thought about what Raymond hadn't quite said. The thing implied in the silence after he'd told her about the eyeless face tilting upward in the dark, turning toward attention it couldn't see. That it had known he was watching. That it had wanted him to know it knew. Lily was 5 years old the year it happened, and she didn't tell anyone for nearly 10 years. It was a Saturday evening in 1998. Her parents had gone to visit relatives and left the 6 children home together, the oldest being 12 and considered responsible enough for a few hours. This was unremarkable by the standards of the time and the neighborhood. They had done it before. They knew the rules. What they decided to do with their unsupervised Saturday was play hide and seek in the dark. Their oldest sister volunteered to go first as the seeker. She moved through the house, turning off every light, the kitchen, the hallway, the living room, one by one until the whole downstairs was dark. She pressed her face against the wall in the front hallway and started counting from 1 to 30. The others scattered, bare feet on hardwood, muffled, whispered arguments about who had claimed which hiding spot first, the soft sounds of doors being pulled nearly shut. Lily went to her oldest sister's bedroom. It was a small room, 10 by 12, perhaps a little larger, with a bed pushed against the far wall and a single window that let in a thin stripe of pale light from the street outside. The closet door was in the corner near the room's entrance, a sliding door, always kept half open, her sister's clothes visible beyond it in the dark. Lily stood in the middle of the room and looked around and decided quickly that there was no good hiding spot. The bed was too low to slide under comfortably. The closet was too obvious. The room was too small. She heard her sister finish counting and call out, "Ready or not, here I come." Lily dropped to the floor and rolled under the bed. She lay on her stomach, with the carpet pressing into her cheek and the particular smell of a child's bedroom floor all around her. Dust and fabric and something faintly cedar from the bundle her mother kept in the closet of every room in the house. She could hear the rest of the house. A door opening somewhere, footsteps on the stairs, a burst of laughter from the back of the house that meant someone had been found. The sounds of an ordinary game. Then she heard the closet door move. Not fully, not suddenly. A slow slide, the rollers traveling in their track, the wood moving with deliberate, unhurried ease. She assumed her sister had come in to check the room. She pressed her face to the carpet and held completely still, watching through the narrow gap below the bedskirt for the shape of her sister's feet. The closet door continued to open, past the halfway point, past 3/4, all the way to the far stop where it should have bumped gently against the door frame, and stopped, silently, a few inches short of contact. Her sister's feet did not appear. The bedroom door was still closed. It had not opened. Lily had not heard it open. No one had come into the room. The closet had opened on its own. Lily lay under the bed and did not breathe. Through the thin gap between the bottom of the bedskirt and the floor, She could see the lower portion of the closet opening. The interior was dark, darker than the room, the stripe of streetlight from the window not reaching it. And then something stepped out. It moved slowly, not stealthily, not quickly, with the measured pace of someone crossing a familiar room in the dark, someone who knew every inch of the space by heart. Lily could see only below the knee, the hem of a dress, her sister's floral dress, the one that hung near the back of the closet. And below it, the toes of dark shoes, round-toed, flat-heeled shoes that she didn't recognize, that didn't belong to anyone in the house. She told herself, with the frantic, rational desperation of a frightened 5-year-old, that maybe her sister had put on different shoes, that maybe she had come in through the window, that maybe there was some explanation. She told herself this very hard. It didn't help. The figure walked to the foot of the bed, stopped, both feet together, the shoes precisely aligned. Then it turned, 90 degrees to the right, rotating with a single smooth movement that brought the toes of the shoes pointing directly at the bed, directly at the mattress above Lily's head, 1 foot away from her face. The shoes were 1 foot from her face. Lily could not move, could not think, could not form a word or a prayer or a scream. She existed in pure stillness, the way small animals exist when a shadow passes over them and something ancient in their nerves understands that movement is the thing that gets you caught. Then the feet turned again, back the way they had come. The figure moved away from the bed, back across the room, back into the closet opening. The sliding door swung shut behind it. Gently, completely, the latch settling with a soft click. The bedroom door opened 2 seconds later. Her sister came in, flashlight in hand, scanning the room. "Found you," she said, and laughed when she bent down and found Lily under the bed. Lily came out. She followed her sister back into the game. She played for the rest of the night as though nothing had happened. She didn't cry until she was in bed with all the lights on and everyone else asleep. And even then she didn't cry for long, because she had already begun the work of convincing herself it hadn't happened. She kept the secret for 8 years, when she finally told it. Sitting around the kitchen table with her siblings while her parents were out, the way you sometimes tell things when the people who would worry most aren't in the room. Her oldest sister set down her cup very slowly and looked at the table. "I played the Ouija board," she said, "a few days before that, at someone's house, up the street, with some friends." She paused. "We weren't sure we burned the board completely." No one spoke for a moment. Then another sister said, "The families that moved into the apartment upstairs after us, you know they kept saying things were disappearing, moved around? One of them said they were missing a shoe." Lily looked at her. "They'd move in and then leave a few months later," her sister continued. "Over and over for years, and they never said why." She was quiet for a second. "I think, whatever it was looking for Cora, checking every night, walking out to see if she was in the room." She looked at Lily. "But Cora was never in the bed. You were." Lily thought about the shoes stopping at the foot of the bed, the toes turning to face her, 1 foot from her face. She thought about the word checking, and she wondered, had wondered ever since, would wonder for the rest of her life, how many nights, before that night and after it, the closet door had opened and closed in the dark while everyone slept, looking, finding the wrong person, going back, waiting for tomorrow. In the winter of 2017, Lily took a job in Asheville, North Carolina. The position was archival work, organized and quiet, the kind of job she had always been suited for, the kind that required patience and an eye for detail, and a tolerance for long hours in rooms that smelled of old paper. The office was located in a building on a leafy street in the historic district, a 2-story house built in 1902, converted over the decades into various uses before her employer had installed desks and filing cabinets and fluorescent lighting and called it a workplace. It was a handsome building, 4,000 square feet of dark wood floors and high ceilings and tall windows, and a narrow attic above the second floor that was never used for anything. To the right of the building, visible through the trees, a large stone church whose bells rang on the quarter hour. Across the street, a funeral home with a discreet sign and always tended flower boxes. To the left, a broad lawn running down to a low brick building. Lily noticed all of these things on her first day and did not remark on them. Asheville sat in the Blue Ridge Mountains, in the heart of the land that had belonged to the Cherokee people before the Indian Removal Act of 1830 had displaced thousands of them along what history would name the Trail of Tears. Some had escaped into the mountains and stayed. Most had not. Lily had thought about this when she took the job, had sat for a moment with the knowledge of it, the way she always sat with the knowledge of the land she was on and what it had held. Then she had accepted the position and driven her things east, and told herself that the history of a place was not the same thing as a haunting. She believed this fully for about 3 months. The work hours were standard, 8 to 5, with occasional evenings when a project required it. She shared the second floor with 3 colleagues who came and went reliably. The first floor housed the common areas: kitchen, conference room, storage. The attic was accessible by a pull-down stair in the second floor hallway and had been opened once during her tenure by a facilities person looking for a circuit breaker and closed again immediately. No one went up there. It was November when the clocks changed and the light left the sky by 5. She was still at her desk at 7 in the evening on a Thursday. The second floor empty around her, a deadline driving her. When she heard it, a hum, rising from downstairs. Formless, wordless, the kind of sound a child makes while occupied with something, drawing or building, or moving small objects from one place to another. It rose and fell without pattern. It was perfectly audible through the floor. Lily sat very still and listened. She had checked on the hour manager before dinner. Her office had been dark. The building was supposed to be empty. She was supposed to be alone. The humming continued. She sat for a long time, her hands flat on her desk, her eyes on the middle distance. She thought about calling someone. She thought about what she would say. She thought about the window, second floor, not survivable, and felt the familiar absurdity of the thought and hated that she had it. She thought about all the times she had stood in a hallway or at the top of a staircase and decided to move toward the thing rather than away from it. She thought about how that had never once turned out to be the decision she later wished she had made. Then she stood up. She turned on every light she could reach on the second floor. She walked to the top of the stairs and turned on the stairwell light and stood for a moment looking down. The first floor was dark. The humming was coming from the kitchen, at the back of the building, past the conference room and the hallway and the door to the storage area. She went down, back straight, pace even, eyes forward. She crossed the front room and the hallway and pushed open the back door and stepped outside into the cold November parking lot, her breath visible in the air, her car sitting alone under the single security light. She stood outside for a full minute. Then she thought about the alarm, about her bag still upstairs, about the impossibility of explaining to anyone why she had left the building unsecured. She went back inside and set the alarm and got her bag and left. The next morning she asked her colleagues, with the careful casualness of someone who had been practicing the question, "Has anything ever happened to you? Here, at night?" They told her. One had heard footsteps on the stairs, ascending, descending, slow and regular, between 8 and 9 in the evening. He had heard it enough times that he had stopped finding it notable. Another colleague, who sometimes slept at the office when he worked late, said the security alarm had triggered on its own several times a year, always in the same narrow window of hours. The sheriff's deputy who came to check had told him. Over enough visits that it had become something like conversation. The building's history. The first family to occupy the house. The father had died in the early 1900s, in circumstances that remained unclear. The second owners, arriving in the 1950s, had reported sounds from the attic at night. Weight on the boards above their heads, something moving. Guards were hired. Nothing was ever caught. The cost became prohibitive. Then one morning, the woman of the house had run out the front door and into the street, screaming, and had never come back inside. No one knew what she had seen in the attic. The building had sat empty for years after that. A hair salon had briefly occupied the first floor. The salon had also eventually left. Those who had stayed long enough to form a picture had arrived at a quiet consensus. 2 presences. A child. Heard more often than seen. The humming, the footsteps, and a man. Seen sometimes on the 2nd floor, in the hallway, standing at the window at the far end, always dressed formally, always still. Lily drove home that evening along the mountain roads, the headlights catching the tree line on either side, and thought about the building sitting on land that had been taken from people who had believed that the land remembered everything. She thought about what it might mean for a place to hold on to its dead. She thought about the 2 presences in the building, the child and the man, and about all the owners and tenants who had come and eventually gone, and about the one thing all of them had in common. They had all left, and the building had stayed, and whatever was in it had stayed too. She finished out the year. She set the alarm on time every evening. She never worked past 7, and she never, not once, walked into the kitchen after dark. Lily was 13 when her oldest sister Cora played the Ouija board. She learned this only afterward, pieced it together from what Cora told her and what she witnessed and what came after, the way you assemble the full shape of something from the fragments you're allowed to see. At the time, she knew only that something changed in the house in the space of a few days, the kind of change you feel in the air before you understand it. A pressure in the rooms, a quality of silence that hadn't been there before. Cora had played with a group of friends at someone else's house. They were older, 16, 17, and the board was handmade, the same way it usually was in those years. A piece of lined notebook paper with letters arranged in a rough arc, yes and no at opposite corners, a quarter to serve as the planchette. Standard. Informal. The kind of thing that felt like a game because it looked like one. They had contacted several entities over the course of the evening. They had asked questions and watched the coin drag their fingers from letter to letter, and laughed when they scared each other, and felt the particular thrill that comes from sitting in a darkened room and inviting things in. Then Cora asked, "Of all of us here tonight, who can you see?" The coin moved across the paper slowly, deliberately, with a weight to it that felt different from the earlier movements. Letter by letter. 2 names. Cora's name, and the name of their younger cousin, who wasn't present that night. The laughter stopped. The room changed temperature. Everyone felt it. The shift from play to something that had crossed over from the side of play into something else, some adjacent territory without a good name. They ended the session. They burned the paper. Cora went home and told herself the discomfort she felt walking through the dark to her front door was just the ordinary aftermath of a frightening game. She had done this before. It always wore off by morning. She was wrong. That night she lay in bed in the room she shared with Lily and could not sleep. It was past midnight. The house was quiet and dark and exactly as it always was. Everything ordinary, everything in its place. Then the chair moved. Their grandfather had made it. A small woven stool, green paint on twisted cord, sitting in the corner of the room where it had always sat. It made a sound, a slow, low creak, the specific sound of weight settling onto it, as though someone had just sat down and was adjusting to get comfortable. Then it stopped. Cora lay rigid under her blanket and stared at the ceiling and did not breathe. "Hey." The word came from across the room. Low, hoarse, wrong. The voice of a man, or something that had studied a man's voice and reproduced it imperfectly, missing some quality it couldn't name or copy. The single syllable fell into the room like a stone into still water. "Can you hear me?" it repeated, again and again, with the patient insistence of something that had done this before and was willing to wait as long as necessary. Then the language shifted, away from English, into something with a different rhythm entirely, something that moved in Cora's chest rather than her ears. Then a laugh, not cruel, not violent, genuinely amused. the laugh of something that had found what it was looking for and was pleased with itself. "Can you see me now?" Cora tried to wake Lily. She reached across the space between their beds and shook her shoulder and called her name. Lily did not stir. She shook harder. Lily slept on, deeply, completely, the kind of sleep that doesn't respond to ordinary stimulus. Cora tried the door to her grandparents' room down the hall. She knocked. No response. She knocked harder. The whole house was sealed in sleep, the way it is sometimes on nights when you most need someone to hear you. As though sleep itself had been distributed too thoroughly, poured over everyone but her. She lay awake until, at some point before dawn, it stopped. In the morning, she told herself it had been a nightmare produced by anxiety, and told herself this firmly enough that she almost believed it. She left the bathroom door open while she did her morning routine. She had always done this when she needed to feel less enclosed, less alone. She bent over the sink and washed her face. She closed her eyes. The water ran warm over her hands. She opened her eyes. The bathroom light was off. Before she could move or speak, the door slammed shut. She was on the floor. That was all she could reconstruct with certainty afterward. She had been standing, and then she was on the floor, and there was something on her, something that had weight without substance, that pressed and held and did not let go, something she could not see or feel in any normal sense, but whose presence was as real as the tile under her back. She fought it the way you fight something in a dream, with the knowledge that your body is capable of more than it's being permitted to do, with a rage that has nowhere useful to go. She screamed with everything she had. The door swung open. She ran. Across the street to her cousin's apartment, where she stood on the doorstep in her pajamas and said only, "I was visited last night." Her cousin looked at her for a moment, then looked past her, at her back. She was bleeding. 3 scratches, starting at the base of the neck, running in parallel lines all the way to the small of her back. Long, thin, precise. The kind of marks that require intention, that are made by something that knows exactly where it is putting its fingers. Her uncle, when he saw them, said it clearly. "This is not a ghost. This is a demon." The family tried holy water first. It came from a church elder who drove out and blessed the house and placed water at every threshold and window frame. It didn't work. Cora still heard the voice at night, still felt the chair, still woke to a room that was occupied in ways she couldn't prove to anyone else. They called for a medicine woman. She was older than anyone in the family could exactly say, and she worked in a tradition that had been handed down through 4 generations of women on her mother's side. She came in and walked through the house without speaking, and then sat at the kitchen table and told them that whatever had come through the board had found something in Cora that it could use. A sensitivity, an opening, a door that had always swung more easily than most people's. She said this without judgment, the way a doctor describes a predisposition. It was simply a fact of Cora's particular construction. She braided 2 cords together, one of dried sage, white as bone, and one of cedar, dark red. She twisted them as she chanted. Words from the old tradition, words for containing and for pushing back, and for drawing a boundary that certain things could not cross. She walked through every room with the braided cord pressed to the walls, to the door frames, to the corners. When she finished, she sat across from Cora and tied the cord around her left wrist with 3 knots, and she said, 3 times, looking her in the eyes, "Do not take this off. Not to sleep, not to shower, not for any reason. Do not take this off." After that, the voice stopped. The presence did not leave entirely. Cora could feel it, sometimes, at the far edge of her perception. A pressure, a waiting, something standing just beyond the reach of what the cord marked as hers. But it did not cross. Lily thought about this often in the years that followed. She thought about the cord, how thin it was, how simple, how a few grams of plant fiber twisted together could hold something back that nothing else could stop. She thought about all the other things she had encountered across her life, the shape in the kitchen, the figure in the attic doorway, the boy from the park, the voice outside her window on the night of her uncle's burial. She thought about what it meant that all of these things had existed alongside the fact of her ordinary life. That she had gone to school and worked and made friends and moved cities and done all the things people do, while something ran parallel to all of it in the dark. She looked at her own wrist. Empty. She had never needed the cord. She had moved through all of it unprotected and emerged, somehow, without the kind of direct contact that had marked Cora's back and sealed the chair in the corner into her memory forever. She didn't know whether to feel fortunate or afraid. She thought about Raymond's voice in the hallway of the Tulsa duplex, not lost, not wandering, waiting for her. She thought about the cord, about what the medicine woman had said, that it doesn't make it leave, it simply marks a boundary it cannot cross, and so it waits, on the other side of the line, patient, still, the way it has always been patient, in cemeteries, in attic doorways, in empty apartments in Phoenix, on the banks of lakes in the Cherokee hills. The way it was patient the night it leaned close to her ear in the dark and she almost understood what it said. The way it is patient, tonight, wherever tonight finds it, wherever tonight finds you.